The days where we're upon the 10 nights in commemoration of the Master of Martyrs, Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And in these days, we not only remember the sacrifice of Abdullah, but of his family members and of his companions who stood by him throughout the most difficult time period which arguably mankind has ever seen. Throughout a period of death, of bloodshed, lack of water, thirst, and lack of essentials for young children. And these months, or the month of Muharram, and these days in which we commemorate the sacrifice of Abdullah, is not one in which we should spend 10 nights remembering and then going back to our daily lives in a state of forgetfulness of what we just spent the last 2 weeks commemorating. The tragedy of Karbala is one which is very definitive in the history of mankind. It is especially important for the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, but equally it is just as important for all Muslims, regardless of the madhab which they follow. And when we say that Karbala is an incident in history, this does not mean that we limit it to that time period in history and that we do not take anything from it today. In fact, the opposite is true. Karbala is a lesson and it is a way of life in the teachings of resistance against oppression, in upholding justice and standing for truth against falsehood wherever it can be found. And the key phrase which you need to take away from today is that Karbala is a lesson. Karbala is a way of life. Karbala is a teaching which we need to embody today. Karbala is the most important, most relevant and most tragic lesson which humanity has and which we are blessed enough to spend 10 nights of the year especially remembering. And it's something that we should hold on to forever, throughout time periods, not just in today's world, but in the future as well. Now, if today we want to try and understand what happened in Karbala and why it actually matters, we need to go back to before the event happened, before Imam Hussein alayhi salam travels to the land of Karbala. After the death of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Islamic leadership of the Ummah and the Caliphate or the Khilafah went through a lot of significant changes. Some bad people came in, some good people came in, and then after that, bad people followed them. There was a lot of different transformations. There was a lot of different struggles between different people who wanted to have influence in the society and in the Ummah. So we have, first of all, the Umayyad rulership who starts fighting for control after the original four caliphates. And under the leadership of the accursed Yazid ibn Muawiyah, may Allah curse him and his soul, he comes and he seizes power. And the reason why he seizes power and his goal for seizing power is so that he can establish a monarchy. He doesn't want to be just a caliph, he wants to be a king. And as we know, this is contrary to our principles and our roots of faith, the very usul al-Din which we hold on to, which is one of them, the pillar of justice. Accepting this type of rulership whereby people are not accepting of this man because of his ill nature and his bad deeds is against our principle of justice. We believe that a ruler who is in charge of the Ummah must be fair and must be just. This is the first two things. Secondly, he wants to be a king. But as we know, in the religion of Islam, and especially in our belief as Shia, the concept of being a king or having a monarchy is something totally forbidden and haram. This is something which we do not accept. We only accept the leadership of the Ummah to be held by a ma'soom, someone who is divinely appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning someone who is designated to rule, meaning that they are free from imperfection, they are free from making sins or committing bad deeds which will harm other people. But even if we look to non-Shia sources, if we look at our brothers in Ahlul Sunnah, for example, do they view someone like Yazid as acceptable and as a legitimate and righteous ruler? No, they do not. Because even in the books of Ahlul Sunnah, you'll find that Yazid is a figure which is cursed for his bad deeds. Whether it was the fact that he was drinking or whether the fact he was a corrupt individual, even they reject him. And they acknowledge that he tried to turn this immaculate, beautiful concept of Khilafah into a monarchy, something which Islam rejects outright. He was a tyrant, he was a dictator, he was an oppressor, and he would openly violate Islamic teachings. It wasn't as if he would act righteous in public and then do haram whilst he was in private. No, he would go to the extent of doing haram deeds even in the public eye and in the public sphere. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam explicitly gives us a reason why he does not pledge allegiance to Yazid. He says that a person like me can never give bay'ah or can never pledge allegiance to a person like him. Now this is important. It doesn't just mean that Imam Hussein himself would never pledge allegiance to Yazid. It means that someone like Imam Hussein, someone who stands for justice and truth and righteousness, will never pledge allegiance to anybody who contradicts these teachings. And this is an important part to take away. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, as the rightful spiritual leader and guide of the Ummah, refused to succumb and to give allegiance to someone like Yazid. And people ask, why is this? Is it because Imam Hussein wanted power and he wanted to become the Khalifa at all costs? No, the opposite is true. He tells us, Imam Hussein, that if the religion of Muhammad, peace be upon him, cannot be preserved or continued except by me dying, then, O swords, take me. Take my life. Let me be killed so that this religion can continue onwards. And so, due to the pressure of the government of Yazid and of Yazid himself, Imam Hussein alayhi salam decides to leave the city of Medina. And some people ask why this is the case. And that is a whole lecture for another day. There's too much to say about why Imam Hussein travelled to the land of Karbala. But one of the most important reasons is that he was worried about his family and the safety of his family, including his young children. Because if the Imam had gone on his own, and he had left the members of the Ahlul Bayt back in Medina, when he rose up against Yazid, there was the fear that the forces and the soldiers of Yazid's government would persecute and hurt the family of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and put them in prison. So the Imam thought that it was in his best interest and everyone else's interest that he takes his family with him, so that on one hand he can keep them under his protection and have a watchful eye over them. And on the other hand, he brings his family with them so that should anything go wrong on this journey towards Karbala and towards his final destination, then these family members and companions would be witnesses to any injustice which took place against the family of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. He knew, in a way, that there would be this oppression. He knew that there would be a lot of pain and that there would be death which faced him if he went and he made this journey. Why? The first reason is that when we take into account the conduct which Yazid had when he was the ruler, we can see that he is the type of person who would oppress innocent men, women and children. He would have arrested them and taken them into his custody and locked them away in a prison cell in horrific conditions. Secondly, on the night and on the eve of Ashura, Imam Hussein alayhi salam goes to his family members and he goes to his companions. And he says two different things to each of them. He says to his companions and to his Sahaba that this is the night of Ashura, tomorrow it is likely that we will be killed. Therefore I give permission for you to leave. You can go and you can be safe. But he doesn't give this same permission to his family member. He doesn't give this to the members of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. Thirdly, the governor of Medina at that time was a person called Amr ibn Sa'id Ashdaq. And when the news of Imam Hussein's martyrdom and death reached him, he was happy. He rejoiced at this news. And at the time when the whole of Medina is engulfed in azab and engulfed in sorrow and in grief, everybody is out crying, everybody is mourning the death of the Imam, this governor is happy at what has happened. When he sees people being upset, he says, why are you crying? What is the need for you to be upset? They say Imam Hussein alayhi salam has been killed. He has been martyred Thursday in the plains of Karbala. He says, you don't need to do all of this crying. This crying should be done for someone like Uthman instead. Therefore, he rejects the tragedies of the Ahlul Bayt and he sides with their oppressors. Now, picture this. If the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam had been left in the city of Medina whilst the Imam is on his journey, how would this governor and his forces have treated them? They would have been locked up. They would have been imprisoned. They may have been killed and other horrible different types of treatment may have afflicted them. This man, Sa'id, was the one who gave the very orders that all of the houses of Bani Hashim should be destroyed and they should be burnt down. And he was very stubborn throughout his life in his hatred of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He was the definition of a Nasibi and from the Nawasib. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam leaves to go to Karbala with his small group of companions and his loyal family members. And he heads towards Kufa, where he had received letters of support from people. However, the people of Kufa unfortunately betrayed the Imam, and they did not follow through on their promises to him due to the pressure of Yazid's governor, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. And at this point, the Imam's caravan and his family members are intercepted by the forces of Yazid in the land of Karbala, where they are forced to stop and where they are surrounded and besieged. And what happens over the next few days, up until the 10th night of Muharram, you already know, because it is narrated every year when someone comes and sits on the minbar. But on the day of Ashura itself, this day, which is the 10th of Muharram, was very unique in the tragedies which befell the people who were present in Karbala. On that day, the Ahlul Bayt had to suffer the most horrible trials and tribulations and death which had ever befallen any of their predecessors. And hence we can say that it is the day of grief for all of humanity to mourn over Imam Hussein alayhi salam. From early in the morning, the Imam leaves his tent and he sees in front of him a scene of absolute devastation. Dead bodies of his family member lie on the floor in front of him. Some of the young children and young companions who had accompanied him are lying in the ground with arrows sticking out of their chest and other parts of their body. He sees all of this, and he sees that there are still people ready to defend him. So he asks for a copy of the Holy Quran to put on his head. And he raises his hands upwards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeks his refuge. He then goes forward and he joins the battle. There are 32 horsemen and 40 warriors on his side who are trying to battle and fight against tens of thousands of soldiers from the camp of Yazid. And despite the fact that he and his family had no water to be able to quench their dehydration for days on end, they go out and they perform a noble battle. And they perform so well. But there is no way that such a small number of people can overcome such a large army in this sense. Eventually, his 6-month-old child, Ali al-Asghar, is killed by an arrow. The women of the Ahlul Bayt are taken captive and chained with shackles and made to walk through the burning desert heat. This type of brutality had never been seen before. Even in the days of Jahiliyyah, people did not stoop to this level. But they did it to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed us with the chance to remember this tragedy and to take a lesson from it. And I asked at the beginning of the lecture, why does this event of Ashura and why does the month of Muharram mean anything to us? Why is it a thing? Why do we come here and why do we mourn? The reason is that Karbala is a symbol of resistance against oppression and against falsehood. It is not just a tragedy for us Shia to come and cry over and do love over. This is just one tiny element of what Karbala really is. We have to understand Imam Hussein didn't die fighting for power. He died to preserve the core of the religion of Islam, of justice, adl, of fairness and equal treatment of people, and justice and kindness. These are the reasons why Imam Hussein sacrifices the life of himself and his family. It is to teach us a lesson for when we are faced with different types of oppression in today's world, that we look back and we follow in the footsteps of how the Imam dealt with these type of difficulties and oppression. You see, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam says that my father told me about what is going to happen to me in Karbala. He told me that I'm going to be martyred. So I put my entire faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I trust in Him, who is my Lord and He is your Lord. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who controls all of destiny, and therefore He goes forward and He does His duty, which is to preserve the religion of Islam and its teachings with His life. Now today, we are living in a world where there is a lot of oppression, where there is a lot of bloodshed against Muslims, especially the followers of the Ahlul Bayt and the free people of the world. So if we then look at what happened in Karbala, and we do not see it as a means to revive the spirit of Imam Hussein alayhi salam in our hearts, then we have done nothing to remember Imam Hussein, and we have dishonored him. Because when we see oppression taking place in the world today, for example in Gaza, we see oppressed Muslims being killed and slaughtered and bombed into pieces, and we say, why is the entire Muslim Ummah silent when these Muslims are killed? Why have they abandoned our brothers in Gaza, for example? Well, the question remains the same when we look back to Karbala. Why did the people of Kufa neglect Imam Hussein alayhi salam? Why did they not come to his rescue? Until today, we have not realized the true message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. We have not understood this concept of resistance to systems of tyranny and oppression. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa says to us that a believer or a mu'min who goes to bed every night and he does not concern himself or think about the affairs of the Muslims and whether they are being harmed or not, then he is not from one of us, meaning he is not from one of the followers of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. And we need to be very careful, because Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says that when you see that there is oppressed people who need to be defended and you do nothing to defend them, then you have committed one of the greater sins. Not a normal sin, but one of the sins which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punishes someone extremely harshly for. And we need to ask, do we want to be of these people who are punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our silence and inaction and for failing to follow through on the true legacy of Imam Hussein? No, we can't let this happen. We can't be scared of death. We can't be scared of martyrdom. We can't be scared of being put in prison. Because if we say that we're Shi'at Ali and followers of Imam Hussein, and we do not follow through on this and we hide away for fear of these things, then we cannot call ourselves titles like Shia. We cannot call ourselves titles like followers of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And this is why Karbala should remain as a timeless legacy for us. Because the Imam was vastly outnumbered. There were so many people against him. Yet ultimately, even though in that battle he was martyred and killed, his message was carried on until today, and he was victorious. In conclusion, the tragedy of Karbala is not something in the past, but it's something we need to follow through and act upon today. The truth will always prevail and triumph over oppression and over tyranny. And in this world that we live in today, which is plagued by injustice and corruption, Karbala should remain our focal point, which we always turn back to as an example of how we should behave. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us become and stay as followers of the Ahlul Bayt and the Imam, and to remain committed to upholding their messages. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant victory to the mu'mineen and the Muslimin. And for all the shuhada, please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after salawat ala Muhammad wa ali